As Andy explained in his Minute for Mission, our session voted to become a Matthew 25 church late in 2020. But just like everything else, our ability to live into the vision of being a Matthew 25 church has been impacted by the coronavirus. But now it's time for us as a congregation to start talking about how we can be a community that serves with and for the least of these. And we serve with them and for them, not because they are a group who's to be pitied, but as people who are deeply loved by Jesus. The themes of the Matthew 25 vision of our denomination are grounded in the gospel. Those who are struggling, those who are on the margins, those who are bearing the brunt of systemic poverty and structural racism can decenter our assumptions about what it means to be beloved children of God. The Matthew 25 initiative, its vision, challenges the authenticity of our faith, and it reminds us of what matters to God, the flourishing of all people. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, members of my family, you did it to me. Jesus says this, and they're profound and radical words. Because every day we see people asking for help, and it's usually for money. As I go home from the church, I turn north onto Keystone Avenue from Broad Ripple Avenue, and every day there's someone there asking for help, for money. Can I or should I give that person money every single day that I see him? What about the person who comes into the church and asks for money because she's lost her job? Or the family whose food stamps run out before the end of the month? I can't help everyone. The church cannot help everyone. So I wonder what we should do. Well, I think this gospel passage makes it very clear what I can do and what I'm called to do and what the church can do and what we are called to do. We are called to remember what Jesus said. When you did it to one of the least of these, my family, you did it to me. It's not for us to decide who's in need of our help or truly deserving of assistance, because really, how can we tell sometimes? The only criterion Jesus set was least of these, which means those who are weak and vulnerable, the forgotten ones, the little ones, especially the children. What you and I can do and what we're called to do is not ignore or overlook, but to look into a human face and see there the face of Jesus, because that's what he said. Matthew 25 is Jesus' last judgment sermon. It's a harsh passage. But to me, it's like a wellness check when I go to the doctor for my yearly physical. The purpose of the physical is not to condemn me or to scare me, although some of my test results do exactly that, but to provide an overview of my general health. And that might require me to develop some new habits and ways of life. This has certainly been my reality in the last year. My doctor makes these recommendations for changes in my behavior or my eating habits because he wants me to be healthy and whole and thrive and flourish, as does our Creator, our Redeemer, our Judge, and our King. Elaine Pagels, who's an American religious historian, says Jesus' words in this gospel are the basis for a radical new social structure based on the God-given dignity and value of every human being. Human beings are not to be ignored, neglected, or abused, or discarded because they're wonderful, because We all know some people who are not particularly wonderful, but because Jesus said he is there with them. What you do to them, you do to me, says Jesus. So Jesus is calling us to something higher and better. And it's not easy to rise to this challenge. But this is Jesus teaching us, calling us that what, how, and whom we choose to love makes a difference. He states very clearly that those who think there are no consequences to actions are mistaken. In a world that seems too big to be changed, our lives have more meaning and value than we could ever imagine. How we spend our time and whom we actively love and do not love can provide us with a diagnostic image of our overall spiritual health. You know, I used to say that Matthew was my favorite gospel, but remember when your preacher spent over 6 months preaching from Matthew a few years ago? Shoot, by the time we were done with preaching that series, I was pretty much over Matthew. I felt like Matthew was judgmental, especially of my behavior, but maybe that's because I was feeling guilty about something. But it seems like, to me, it can be a gospel of brimstone and hellfire, and you know I'm not that kind of preacher. When I read Matthew 25, I hope that I'm a sheep and I'm not a goat. But you know what? Neither the sheep people nor the goat people knew when they had or had not had the opportunity to show love to Jesus. If I had known that Jesus was there in the midst of the people I was ignoring, of course I would have given them something to eat or drink. I would have cared for them. I would always do that for Jesus. But for someone I don't know, or someone I think may be working the system, or someone I think just wants money to buy a bottle of wine, am I supposed to help that person? Am I supposed to love that person too? I think the kind way about talking about the Gospel of Matthew is that it is a wellness check and perhaps even a warning to those of us living in unhealthy, self-centered ways. Jesus is looking for us to show a natural overflowing of love, not a calculated way of giving and serving. The call is to freely share with strangers, prisoners, those who are hungry, thirsty, sick, naked. And if we think Matthew is being too judgmental with us or asking too much of us, we can remember that there are only 2 criteria in this passage. And that is whether or not you saw Jesus Christ in the face of the needy, and whether or not you gave yourself away in love in his name. In other words, to see the face of Christ and to be the face of Christ. Working to eradicate systemic poverty, which is our emphasis here at Northminster with the Matthew 25 initiative, it's going to be difficult. Because although we are already active in our outreach to the community in the ways that Andy talked about this morning, the hardest part of the vision is for us to implement this, and for us to implement will be confronting the systems that create and perpetuate poverty. We're called not only to be compassionate, but also to address the factors that cause such outcomes for large portions of our society and our world. So today, we are also inviting you to participate in an offering of letters from Bread for the World, an organization that works to eradicate hunger and works towards food sustainability in the United States and around the world. Those of you watching online can go to the Bread for the World website and find instructions for how to send a letter to your representatives in Congress asking them to continue and expand funding and programs for those who are hungry. And remember that the mission team welcomes your input for how we can work together as a church community to address these issues. I don't like warnings or wellness checks. They can make me uncomfortable, and they often call for changes in my behavior that I really don't want to make. They can make all of us recalibrate our lives if we aren't careful. But still, I think we all need to hear the warning in this gospel passage, because I know that I have experienced what it is like to see the face of Christ in someone who is desperate, and I could help them. And I also know the responsibility and the honor of being the face of Christ to someone who needed to be loved. Those have been defining moments in my life as a minister and as a Christian. But there's another important idea I will take away from this passage, from these last verses in Matthew 25. This is not just a judgment passage or a call passage. Matthew 25, 31 through 46 is also a statement about God. The God of Jesus, the God of the Bible, is not just some remote being sitting up on a throne in heaven. Jesus says in this passage that God is here among us in the messiness and the ambiguity of human life. God is here particularly in your neighbor, the one who needs you. Do you want to know what God looks like? Then I invite you to look into the face of one of the least of these, the vulnerable, the weak, and especially the children. And there you will see the face of God. I look forward to seeing how the vision of Matthew 25 plays out into the life of Northminster. That vision can certainly help us plan for what we envision for our church in the future. This time of transition is the perfect time to be led by a vision of compassion, love, and service, so that all may thrive. May it be so. Amen.